Right now, about 20% of the world's oil is moving through a stretch of water so narrow that you can practically see across it.
Yeah, the Strait of Hormuz.
Exactly. And if you follow the financial press at all, the prevailing narrative is that if the strait closes, the global economy is just, facing an apocalyptic shared disaster.
Right. Everybody goes down together.
Right. But the underlying data tells a completely different story. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are going to explore how massive shifts in U.S. energy production have, well, completely flipped the script on global supply shocks.
It really has.
Yeah, and what looks like an overseas energy crisis might actually be the greatest strategic weapon the United States currently possesses.
Because honestly, what we are looking at here is a classic asymmetric shock.
Okay, break that down for us.
So in game theory and global economics, an asymmetric shock is a single event that hits the exact same global market, but creates vastly different, almost polarized consequences, depending entirely on your position on the chessboard.
So the pain isn't distributed equally.
Exactly. Not even close.
And to really understand that positioning, I think we have to look at the 20-year shift in the global energy map. Because 2 decades ago, the United States imported roughly 60% of its petroleum.
Wow, 60%.
Yeah. The vulnerability was just obvious. I mean, imagine you're at a neighborhood potluck, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the person bringing the main course suddenly cancels.
20 years ago, everyone just starved.
Right. If the Middle East tightened supply back then, the U.S. economy ground to a halt. You had immediate price spikes, surging inflation, and this very linear cause and effect relationship between overseas instability and domestic economic pain.
Which is exactly why that old narrative is so deeply entrenched in our collective psyche,
Yeah.
But the physical realities of global oil extraction have changed fundamentally.
You're talking about the shale revolution.
Yeah, the advent of horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing, it didn't just casually reduce U.S. dependence on foreign oil, it turned the United States into the largest crude oil producer on the planet.
Right, but it's not just about the sheer volume, is it?
No, the crucial mechanism to understand here is the speed of production. Traditional deepwater offshore drilling, that takes years of capital investment before a single barrel is produced.
Oh, for sure. Huge lag time.
But shale is short-cycle capital. A producer in the Permian Basin can spin up a new well in, like, a matter of months. That nimbleness turned the U.S. into the world's swing producer.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. Because if the United States is producing all its own oil at home, why does a bottleneck halfway across the world still cause so much panic on our news feeds?
That is the big question.
Because crude is still a globally traded, globally priced commodity, right?
Yeah.
If supply drops drastically, the global benchmark prices like Brent and WTI, they still shoot up.
Yes, they do.
U.S. consumers still pay more at the pump. So how does domestic production actually insulate the economy from a global shock?
To answer that, you really have to follow the physical ships. Like, where are those barrels actually going?
Right.
Currently, only about 2.5% of the oil moving through the Strait of Hormuz is destined for the United States.
2.5%. That's practically a rounding error.
Exactly. Meanwhile, a staggering 75% of it is heading straight to Asia, specifically China, India, Japan, and South Korea.
Wow.
And this creates a critical distinction between a price problem and a supply problem.
Think about it like this, right? A price problem is like your electricity bill going up 20%. It's annoying, but, you adapt.
You turn off a few lights, maybe?
Right. But a supply problem is the power company physically cutting the lines to your house. Factories slow down, energy gets rationed, production stalls.
That is the structural difference perfectly illustrated. For the United States, a disruption is just a price problem. It acts as a tax on the consumer, it's highly annoying, it creates inflationary pressure, but the physical commodity is still flowing.
The logistics networks keep running.
Exactly, the lights stay on. But for those Asian manufacturing hubs, it is a physical supply problem. You cannot run a steel mill or a chemical plant on a delayed shipment.
No matter how much money you're willing to pay.
Right. Higher prices slow an economy down, but losing physical access to energy actively breaks it.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Because of that dynamic, a supply shock doesn't just insulate the United States, it actually stimulates specific sectors of the American economy.
Yeah, people miss this part entirely.
When global prices spike, U.S. producers and exporters generate massive immediate revenue. So the pain at the consumer level is offset by this windfall at the industrial level.
Exactly.
But it's not just about crude oil, is it?
Hmm.
To really understand the leverage here, we have to look at the secondary layer of this market.
You're talking about liquefied natural gas, LNG.
Yeah, the source material highlights this as a major hidden factor.
It is arguably the most critical variable in this new paradigm. The Middle East is a colossal exporter of LNG. Roughly 20% of the global supply flows through that exact same strait.
And Qatar and the United Arab Emirates send over 90% of their exports through it, right?
Yes. And at the exact same time, over the past 10 years, the United States has quietly built the infrastructure to become the largest exporter of LNG in the world.
Okay, but wait, I want to challenge that timeline for a second.
Go for it.
Building an LNG export terminal where you're supercooling natural gas to, what, negative 260 degrees Fahrenheit, so it can be loaded onto a specialized ship that takes half a decade and billions of dollars in capital
It's
expenditure.
a massive undertaking, yeah.
So if the strait closes tomorrow, how does the U.S. instantly capitalize? We can't just spawn new export terminals overnight to meet the panic demand.
Well, we don't need to build new terminals to capitalize on the shock. The leverage exists in the spot market and destination flexibility.
Oh, okay. How does that work?
Historically, LNG was sold on rigid point-to-point 20-year contracts. But the U.S. basically pioneered a flexible cargo model.
Mhm.
If a crisis hits and European or Asian buyers are suddenly starved of Qatari gas, they will pay an astronomical premium for immediate delivery.
So we just reroute the ships?
Exactly. U.S. exporters can physically reroute ships that are already on the water to the highest bidder. We saw exactly this dynamic play out in the financial markets during recent geopolitical flare-ups.
Yeah, the source mentioned Venture Global, right? They're one of the fastest growing LNG exporters, and their valuation jumped nearly 40% in a single month.
Yeah, and Cheniere Energy, the largest U.S. LNG exporter, they saw a 15% spike.
It's the ultimate arbitrage. As the Middle East loses its capability to physically deliver the molecules, the U.S. simply steps in to sell its own supply to desperate buyers at a premium.
And this reliance on physical choke points actually mirrors a really fascinating digital bottleneck we are seeing right now in the technology sector.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to pivot momentarily to that tech parallel. It's so interesting. Right now, the AI industry isn't dealing with a scarcity of supply. It's dealing with a decision bottleneck.
An overabundance of tools.
Exactly. You have GPT 5.4, Gemini 3.1 Pro, Cloud Opus 4.6. The end user is left completely paralyzed, trying to figure out which model is actually optimized for their specific task.
Whether that's coding, data analysis, or creative writing. It's an informational choke point. The supply is there, but the routing is incredibly inefficient.
And the source material highlights how platforms like Abacus AI are solving this. For like a $10 monthly subscription, they act as a traffic controller using their root LLM or deep agent features.
Right, you just input your prompt, and the algorithm instantly navigates that bottleneck. It automatically routes your query to the absolute best model for that specific job in milliseconds.
But that brings up the ultimate contrast between digital logistics and maritime logistics, right?
How so?
Well, if software can instantly reroute a data packet around a bottleneck to find a solution, why can't a physical supertanker just reroute around a blockade? I mean, it's a massive ocean.
Yeah.
Can't countries just buy oil from somewhere else and recalculate the route?
Because you cannot code your way out of physical geography. If you are forced to bypass traditional Middle Eastern maritime routes, your only real alternative is sending these massive vessels all the way down around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa.
Which is a huge detour.
It adds weeks to the transit time, and it burns millions of dollars in additional fuel per voyage. But more importantly, it ties up the global shipping fleet.
Oh, because the ships are stuck in transit longer.
Exactly. If a ship is spending an extra 3 weeks on the water, it is not returning to port to pick up the next cargo. Freight rates skyrocket, vessel availability plummets, and the entire just-in-time logistics network just collapses.
Which brings us to the most vulnerable player on the board, and the one facing the sharpest end of this geographic reality: China.
The biggest loser in this scenario.
Yeah, they are the largest oil importer in the world, consuming 15 to 16 million barrels of oil every single day. And crucially, they import about 11 million of those barrels, with a massive portion flowing directly from the Middle East.
And look, Beijing is acutely aware of this vulnerability. This isn't some blind spot for them. They've recognized the Malacca dilemma and the Strait of Hormuz bottleneck for decades.
So they did try to reroute, in a sense.
They did.
Yeah.
They have aggressively tried to build safeguards. They diversified their pipeline imports through Russia. They secured maritime shipments from Brazil and Venezuela, and they poured immense capital into filling their strategic petroleum reserve.
But a strategic petroleum reserve is fundamentally finite. It's like relying on a backup generator during a hurricane.
Okay, that's a great way to put it.
It buys you a few days, but if the storm sits over your house for a month, the lights are going out.
Exactly. Those safeguards only delay the risk, they don't eliminate it. And this is where the structural mechanics of different economies really come into play.
Because the United States is primarily a service-driven economy. We use energy for transportation, heating, cooling.
But China is the industrial manufacturing floor of the globe. Heavy industry, smelting, chemical refinement, massive export manufacturing, these processes consume energy on a scale that is honestly difficult to comprehend.
So in the short term, a supply shock forces China to tap into those strategic reserves. They absorb the initial blow.
But if the disruption drags out, those reserves begin to drain. And if the bottleneck persists, it transitions from a logistical headache into a catastrophic structural failure.
Wow.
You cannot operate a globally dominant manufacturing hub on delayed maritime shipments and dwindling domestic reserves. Eventually, industrial output has to be rationed. Factories are forced to power down. The export engine sputters.
This timeline of structural failure is really where the leverage lies. And if you zoom out and look at the broader geopolitical chessboard, the timing of these tensions in the Middle East is highly suspicious.
It's very instructive, yes.
Because these energy market shocks frequently coincide with critical, high-stakes trade negotiations between Washington and Beijing. We're talking about negotiations over severe tariffs, advanced semiconductor restrictions, and the deliberate decoupling of global supply chains.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, you realize these negotiations aren't just diplomatic exercises in finding mutual ground.
Right.
They are exercises in applying and testing leverage. And leverage requires pressure, economic pressure, market pressure, and foundational energy pressure.
So what does this all mean? Are we saying this isn't an energy story at all?
It really isn't, because if your entire manufacturing base is facing a potential shutdown due to a choked-off energy supply, you are fundamentally compromised at the negotiation table. You can't play hardball on tech tariffs if your factories are weeks away from forced energy rationing.
Because the U.S. can't tolerate the shock, while China faces an existential structural threat from it.
Exactly. The shock itself ceases to be just an economic event. It transforms into an applied weapon. The Strait of Hormuz is no longer merely a physical choke point for maritime shipping. It is a geopolitical choke point for global power.
That completely reframes how you process the daily news cycle.
Doesn't it?
We started by looking at what the headlines present as this shared, universal terror over Middle Eastern oil disruptions. But by examining the mechanics of the shale revolution and the spot market dynamics of U.S. LNG, we see how America has insulated itself.
Right.
We uncovered this asymmetric reality, right? Where a shock that forces the U.S. to pay slightly more at the pump threatens to physically dismantle the Asian manufacturing engine.
And the crucial takeaway for you, listening right now, is to look past that surface-level market panic. The next time you see breaking news about global energy tensions, ask yourself who is experiencing a manageable price inflation and who is staring down the barrel of an absolute supply collapse.
That delta between inconvenience and devastation is where true global power resides.
Perfectly said.
It's just a masterclass in macroeconomic leverage. And it leaves me with one final, kind of provocative thought for you to chew on as we wrap up this deep dive.
Let's hear it.
If the United States currently wields its fossil fuel independence, its shale and LNG dominance, as this ultimate strategic weapon against manufacturing giants like China, what happens as the world inevitably transitions to renewable energy?
Oh, that's a massive question.
Right. If we leave crude oil and natural gas behind, does the United States surrender its greatest geopolitical advantage? Or will the exact same power struggles, the exact same asymmetric bottleneck dynamics, simply migrate over to the critical minerals needed for solar panels and high-density batteries?
The lithium, the cobalt, the rare earths.
Exactly. Who controls the geographic choke points of tomorrow's energy grid? It is absolutely something to think about the next time you plug in an electric car.
The chessboard changes, but the game theory remains exactly the same.
It really does. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking past the headlines, stay curious, and we will catch you on the next one.